Over the last number of weeks, we discussed how the mind and its perceptions can create some pretty horrible influences in your life. But unless you're a politician, you can't exactly exist without your mind. So today, we're going to cover the awesomeness that exists within your mind that offsets the bad stuff it creates when left to its own devices. And we're going to learn how to better control your mind. Ready? Go. Welcome to the I Am Podcast, where we answer all the questions about spirituality and inner peace that you ever wanted to ask, and where we learn the secrets of humanity and divinity through a better understanding of both. I am your host, Sean Webb. We have a process here. Step 1, learn the basics of how pain and suffering come to be within you. Then, Step 2, break the system of emotional pain and suffering and uncover our true spiritual existence within. We're presently in the middle of Step 1, where we're calling it the Body, Mind, Spirit 101. Step 2, we'll be teaching you about the spirit and spiritual enlightenment. But we got to cover the basics first before we go on to fixing anything. Because if you don't understand all the inhibitors that can block you from being more spiritual, then any change that we create is going to be temporary for you. And we don't want that. The background you'll need for this episode, basically go watch episodes 2 through 14. If you want to fully understand the best scientific explanation to the practical path to spirituality and inner peace, you'll need to have those so that we can enable your growth in future episodes. In episodes 2 through 14, we basically introduce the body, mind, spirit model, and then we move directly into the mind, and for the first time in history, explain the slow motion process of how all emotions are created from within the emotional influence system here. And thus, we revealed the path to better reduce emotional turmoil and allow us to uncover our wonderful God-connected spiritual existence within. And so if you're caught up, moving forward, we've covered some of the ugly processes that occur within the mind, and now we're going to zoom out just a bit for a quick last look before we move into other sections of the body, mind, and spirit model in the next episodes. So now, from a 50,000-foot view, let's look at the mind. The mind, of course, is one of the three components of the body, mind, spirit system that comes together to create our human existence. Scholars have been trying to define the mind for hundreds, if not thousands of years, so that we can better understand it and better utilize it for our greater good. Well, today, we learn what the mind is and what the mind isn't, and how we can use the knowledge to make our lives better from within. So what exactly is your mind? Well, science and psychology have historically had an issue with drawing a thick black line around the mind because of their mix-up between the word mind and the word brain. The brain is the 3-pound group of cells that exists in your head. And what are cells? Well, we don't often think about it, but cells are living, breathing, eating, eliminating, procreating, thinking, and conscious beings that come together in symbiotic form into a community that works together in helping the body and us, by default, survive as long as possible on this planet. The brain is the biological organ that helps us figure out the world and how to survive in it. The mind, on the other hand, is not that group of cells that is the brain. The mind is something else altogether. The mind is the experience we have because of that group of cells being there doing its thing. The mind is the experience we have because our bodies contain a brain. And before you poo-poo that rather simplistic definition, you should know that Dr. Francis Crick, one of the men who discovered DNA, basically agrees with that definition, and who not only was an amazing molecular biologist and physicist who specialized in theoretical neurobiology and consciousness, but who also won a Nobel Prize for his work in 1962. Okay, so the confusion that science has about the brain-mind separation has to do with their assumption that cells themselves are not themselves intelligent, and in addition, do not have their own consciousness. Science seems to see the brain and body as more an automated system, and because of that, we often speak of the body and its parts like we would an automobile and its parts. Just as we say things like, the engine transforms potential energy into kinetic energy, and the transmission motivates the wheels, and the catalytic converter removes the pollutants from the exhaust. For a car, we wind up also using that same type of language when we talk about the living cell activity in the body. The heart pumps oxygen around the system, the kidneys purify and remove contaminants from the blood, and this honks the horn. Beep! If you have kids, you'll understand that one. But the thing is that simple observation disproves this theory that the body is an automated system. For instance, white blood cells can form pseudopodia, fake feet, that allow them to walk upstream against the flow of blood to get to an invading pathogen. And the same type of intelligence and decision-making abilities also applies to brain cells and other cells throughout the body. Now, the body is an amazing society, and we have its own section of the body-mind-spirit model that we're going to cover in future episodes. But basically, the body, and the brain specifically, has a set of goals or a function to serve from a biological perspective. And that goal is a simple one: survive. Do the things that are required to perpetuate life, reproduce whenever possible. And so the brain is designed to assist the body and us as the consciousness within the body in that survival goal. Hey, look, my brain's coming out of my ears. The brain is designed to learn and think for itself and also react to our conscious needs. When we're born, the mind is basically a clean slate, but the brain already has a ton of information in it that is designed to help us survive, even from minute one. From immediately after birth, the brain already knows how to breathe in oxygen. The brain already knows how to suckle on mommy's nipple. And even in the first few moments, and before we're born actually, our brain has already started gathering information to store for later use, right? Mommy's face, mommy's smell, mommy's heartbeat. And as we grow, and as our brains collect more and more information, we start to learn. We start to be able to control this thing that keeps waving in front of our face. There it is. We learn our language, our names, our customs, our religions, our place within society. And so our mind becomes a place of a portion of our consciousness, and a place where our true identities interact with our brain over here and the rest of the body. That's why the body-mind-spirit model, the mind falls in between the body and the spirit, because within the model of our human existence, that's where the mind resides, as a conduit between our body and our spirit. Now, our brain cells, their tendency is to be proactive. The brain is always processing information for us. There's a lot going on that we don't notice, that doesn't even get brought to our conscious attention, because the brain learns what is important to us and what isn't. And so they start making decisions about what to bring to our conscious attention. Your brain cells were active for you before your mind really came into existence. And so their charter is to stay active. So when you have those spurious thoughts out of the blue, or if you're the creative type and you slide into the zone sometimes, what that is the consciousness of your brain working for you. It's the reason that if someone tells you not to think of a purple elephant, the first thing that pops into your head is the idea of a purple elephant. The words get decoded by the little guys in the occipital lobes, the thought gets transmitted, and the cells in the frontal lobe create an image of that imaginary creature. This is the brain reacting for you without your input. It's the same reason you flinch when something comes flying at your head, and the same reason you sneeze when a potential foreign object tickles the inside of your nose. So those cells are awake, alive, intelligent, making decisions. And that little epiphany is awesome, that there's an intelligence and a consciousness working proactively to help us live a longer and arguably better life. But if that weren't enough, it's also true that our cells are reactive to our conscious will. As well as being there to help operate the body without our input, the cells are also there to help us execute whatever conscious will that we have in moving our bodies around, in thinking about how to solve various problems in the world, and to help us generate reactions to things that happen in our world. And this last part is where the train runs off the tracks a little bit, because as your brain reacts to your conscious will, allowing you to drive your body around and interact with your world, the proactive tendency of the brain for it to try to understand and define everything in your world, including you, causes the brain to help build a mind's perception of self, which becomes the ego. Now, we already talked about the ego in depth in previous episodes, which we already watched so we can fully understand this episode, right? Fine, go watch them. I'll wait. So we already know that the ego is one of the main components that is the source of all emotional pain and suffering. But that said, we also know via episode 4 that Half of that process is our perceptions that fill in the equation of emotion, which allow for negative emotions to occur. And we also know that there is a twofold path to both adjust our perceptions and eventually quell the influence of the ego. So here's the big question. Does that take our minds totally out of the picture at that point? I mean, does that make the mind totally evil? Thankfully, no. So let's talk about that for a minute. Through attachment, the mind creates ego, the relative valuation system of the ego, and the equation of emotion. And yes, those things can and do take over your mind if you let them, as they do with almost all the world's population currently. But when you reduce the influence of those components within the mind, that doesn't have any ill effects on the mind itself. In fact, just the opposite. When you free your mind of emotional influence, your mind is released to be able to do what it was meant to do in the first place, which is to help you make your life longer and more to your liking. When your mind is free of the fear of what change might bring to your life, you can more freely do the thinking that's required to make a decision about moving into the next chapter of your life, whether that be a job change or a relationship status change or whatever. When you are unencumbered by emotional reactions, you can think more clearly and take action that will improve your life. When you're free of the sadness connected with a loss, and that even happens within your ego, by the way, that's the day that you wake up and finally accept your loss and have decided to move on with your life. Well, when you don't have to even go through that whole sadness process in the first place, you can move into acceptance almost immediately and take actions to create your life how you want it moving forward. From a grander perspective, if your mind is free of the worrying about what stack of gifts that you aren't going to be able to afford this Christmas, then you are free to give more freely to the Feed the Hungry campaigns and the clean water campaigns for impoverished countries. The thinking mind is a rational mind. It's a clear mind. It's unencumbered by selfish thoughts connected with how the ego is reacting to things. And the mind held hostage by emotions is the wackadoo mind. You want to look at some examples? For instance, a 92-year-old woman in Florida recently fired 4 bullets at her 53-year-old neighbor's house and car when he refused to give the old lady a kiss. She perceived an attack on her perception of self when he didn't go for the smooch, so she shot at him. You think without the emotional reaction that might have ended better than a 92-year-old woman going to jail? It was recently reported in The Week that Brian the Goat Man Hopper found himself stranded on a desert island off the coast of California when his inflatable raft deflated on him. He spent 5 days there eating plants and vitamins trying to find a way off the island before finally using his cell phone to call for help. Mr. Hopper reported the reason he didn't call for help earlier was that he was embarrassed. True story. You think that if he didn't have that embarrassment, he could have acted a little more rationally? In a recent poll, 59% of high school students, tomorrow's generation, by the way, admitted cheating on a test over the last year. 21% admitted stealing from a parent or other relative. 80% said they lied about something significant to a parent within the last year. Yet 92% of these kids say they're satisfied with their own personal ethics and character. Do you think that if they were less influenced by their ego's need to paint over the truth, that they might be better able to take action in facing their bad activities and changing their behavior? Because their ego's need to do well on a test and or be perceived as someone who does well on tests and or increase the relative valuation of their ego in comparison to other kids taking the test, and thus having a happier emotion when the higher grade came through, that is what caused them to cheat on the test. For the 21% who stole their family's stuff, it was because of their ego's need for the accumulation of worldly things, which creates temporary happiness, that they stole from their family. It was because of the 80%'s egoic tendency not to be devalued and remain in happiness that 80% lied about something that might have gotten them in trouble. And of course, coming full circle, it's their ego's preference that they be happy and that their definition of existence be proven superior, so that almost all of them reported being fine with their ethics level and character. And you can sit there and say, oh my God, what is the world coming to? But in reality, until we teach the world and the next generations specifically the pitfalls of an untamed mind and teach you and them how to get in touch with God directly, it's only going to get progressively worse until we wind up all killing each other, either intentionally or negligently. So the trick is to use the non-egoic mind and use it to control the egoic mind into full submission. And just think of what the future can hold if we do that. When you allow your mind to operate without emotional influence or attachment to a particular position, you can use your non-egoic mind to analyze situations objectively. When you're free of what a decision means to you personally, i.e. egoically, you can make the best decision in taking action in any situation. Let me tell you a story. The first Mongol invasion in Japan in 1274 should have been a rout on the Mongol side, wiping out the Japanese. Genghis Khan, who at the time had expanded his empire all the way into Eastern Europe, decided to go ahead and expand into Japan as well. So in that effort, he sent thousands of Chinese Mongols across the sea into Japan to wipe out the substantially fewer Japanese samurai who were enlisted to defend Japan. But to the surprise of Khan, and basically everybody else except for the samurais, those samurai warriors, although greatly outnumbered, wiped his ruthless Mongol fighters out. In fact, the samurai left just enough of the Mongols alive to send back to China to tell the story of the massacre, so Khan would think twice about trying it again. Do you think those great samurai warriors who won those battles of insurmountable odds with nothing but samurai swords did so by worrying about how many men they were going to individually fight, or that they could die by going into such a lopsided battle? Or did they simply take action with a clear mind, deal with their 20 or more opponents that they individually had, and send the rest packing with their tails between their legs? Those samurai did not acknowledge fear. They just did what they needed to do. In fact, the fearlessness of the samurai warriors in the face of probable pain and death is what intimidated and demoralized the Mongols the most. And so similarly, do you think you might be able to make your positive, life-changing decisions and more confidently take the actions to make your life better? To take up your proverbial sword against the things that stand in your way of joy, if you were able to remove the fear of the unknown that may lie ahead if you change things? Because your situation is the same situation that the samurai warriors had. You are facing a ton of potential opponents that are standing in your way of joy, that you can slay with ease, by the way, if you focus your mind correctly. If you use the rational thinking portions of your mind and employ the cells of your body to work for you without letting them waste time with emotional turmoil that inhibits you and ties you down, like the samurai, you can and will not only live a more effective life, but you will also be that much closer to a sustained inner peace. Homework. For this week's homework, I want you to find 5 15-minute segments to quiet your mind and meditate. Your ego exists within your mind. Quieting your mind quiets your ego by default. And by the way, coaxing your brain cells to listen to your conscious intention for them to quiet down and be at peace allows you to practice taking better control of your mind and thus those brain cells. Breathe in, breathe out. Focus on nothing. Let the thoughts come and go, because they will come. I mean, that's your proactive nature of your brain cells. They're just trying to help you remember and process things and throw things up in front of your consciousness that they think you might need to think about. Tell them to quiet themselves. They'll listen eventually. Sit in a chair, do it in bed, I don't care, but do it. It's the baby step introduction to the second portion of our twofold path that we talked about in the last few weeks, and which we'll talk about in the next few weeks. Next, check out the audiobook Buddhist Meditation for Beginners by Jack Kornfield. It's a great seminar recorded in front of a small audience, and it explains numerous basic principles about meditation rather well. Contrary to popular belief, Buddhism is not a religion. And it isn't really contrary to other religious beliefs, by the way, either. It's more a life philosophy that is actually congruent to the ideas within Christianity, Judaism, and Islam that support that divinity can be found within. Now, you can get this book about Buddhist meditation for beginners for free if you sign up for the 14-day free trial at Audible. Just go to www.audibletrial.com/IamSpirituality and get this book or any other of their 85,000 titles for free. Next, stop by iTunes and drop us a written review and share it that we exist to your friends and family. Facebook is an easy way to do that. You can also click the share buttons on the website, where we also author some written posts. Twitter, twitter.com/IamSpirituality. Facebook, facebook.com/IamSpirituality. Next week, we take a look at the body from a spiritual perspective, where we look at the consciousness of the cells themselves, and if they're conscious, can we communicate with them? Don't miss it. See you next week. Peace.